Folks, every day in America, 115 people die because of opioid addiction. This has reached epidemic proportions. In fact, the president has already declared it a national emergency. Not only do 115 people die every day because of opioid addiction, but the recent figures have shown us that the average age that Americans are living now, for the first time in decades, has decreased. And they're attributing that to the opioid addiction. So can you imagine such an epidemic that it's actually decreasing the average age that Americans are living? All of you know someone who has been addicted. All of you have a loved one who's been addicted or had a problem with this drug. It is no question about it. It's out of control. We've got to get it in control. I often frame this issue as being a number of different components. First of all, we've got that component that's somewhat tangible. We can somewhat get our arms around the fact that we've got to prevent it. How do we prevent it? We prevent it by decreasing the number of prescriptions, by decreasing the number of pills that are being written, by controlling those type of things, by trying to make sure that we're monitoring what drugs are coming in the mail, particularly the international mail. All of that is somewhat, as I say, tangible. Then you've got the second component, not as tangible, and that is, what do you do with those 2.5 million people who are addicted right now? How do we get them back into our society to become productive members of our society? That's more difficult. You know that addiction is a lifelong challenge. You know that some programs work better for people than other programs work for people. Finding that right fit and what works for someone is very difficult, but we're attacking that as well. You know, until last week I framed it as being two components, but I met with some law enforcement personnel here about a week ago, and they reminded me that there's a third component too, and that component is crime. Because what happens often is that people who have never been involved in crime because of the addiction become involved, and it spills into our society that way as well. But very quickly, I want to tell you about a couple of things we're doing in Congress. First of all, we passed two significant bills. One's called 21st Century Cures. It was passed out of our committee, and the Energy and Commerce Committee. Right now in America, there are 10,000 diseases known to man, but only 500 diseases can be treated and cured. We have put more money into the National Institutes of Health to study these diseases, to see how we can come up with some cures. That's why it's called 21st Century Cures. Also, along with that, we put money in there, actually two grants in there, two big grants. The first one was $478 million. The second one was almost that same amount. And we put those grants in there to deal with opioid addiction. Remember, a lot of these issues are mental health issues as well. We know we've got to treat mental health. The second bill I wanted to tell you about is called CARA, C-A-R-A, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. That too came through the Energy and Commerce Committee, and that specifically deals with addictions, particularly with opioid addiction. Again, we've got grant money in that. In fact, I believe that this program today is being put on as a result of some of those grant funds that we allocated in Congress. So that shows you that the money's being spent in a good way, and we're proud of that. Last week in the Health Subcommittee, we passed 57 bills dealing with opioid addiction. 3 of those bills were mine. I was the lead sponsor. The lead co-sponsor on those bills were all Democrats. This is a bipartisan effort. I've never seen addiction impact one party over another. This is something we have to work with together. We have to work with this together. This is not partisan politics at all. And in Washington, we recognize that, and that's why we're trying to address that. Very quickly, and finally, I want to tell you about the 3 bills that 2 of the bills anyway, that I'm sponsoring. One of the bills has to do with pharmacists. As you heard, currently I'm the only pharmacist serving in Congress. What we're trying to do is to give pharmacists the materials and the training that they need to identify fraudulent and forged prescriptions so that we can play our part. We have a very important role. We accept that role. Now, we're not law enforcement. We're not trained as that, but we understand we have a very important role. So one of those has to do with that bill has to do with giving pharmacists the tools they need. A second one, and one that's very important to us in the 1st Congressional District here, has to do with telemedicine and telehealth. You know, we have a lot of rural areas in our district, a lot of areas that utilize telemedicine. And what this bill will do will give opportunity for physicians to be able to write prescriptions for medication assisted treatment for the opioid addiction without having to see the patient physically the first time. Right now, that requires a waiver. And what we're trying to do is to make those waivers more readily available so that we can utilize telemedicine throughout our districts. That's two of the bills that I'm sponsoring right now. We are addressing this in Congress, but we need your help. I take this information and take it back with me to Washington, D.C. That's what we all do on the committee, because we understand we've got to address this situation. Our country needs relief from this problem, and we can only get that relief working together. One of the points that was made, it was about removing the stigma of addiction. That's something we've all got to work on. As you've heard, it doesn't discriminate against anyone. Addiction does not discriminate. We are all in this together. This is going to have to be a team approach. We all understand that. Mary, thank you. Thank Mary. Let's have a round of applause.